you're blessed to live to 85, you have a 1 in 2 chance of being diagnosed with dementia.
1 in 2.
1 in 2, which means it's either you or your partner, and that's horrifying. But what most people don't know is you can have an impact on that. And since 2005, I wrote a book with my friend Rod Schenkel called Preventing Alzheimer's. And I updated it in 2017 with Memory Rescue. And the big idea is if you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. And you talked about your mom having it. The mnemonic that we'll talk about is called Bright Minds. And the G in Bright Minds is genetics, but we don't think about it properly. Oh, well, I'm overweight because my family's overweight, or I have hypertension because it runs in my family, or I have diabetes because it runs in my family, or I have Alzheimer's disease, or I'm vulnerable to it and there's nothing I can do about it. And that's a lie. Genes increase your vulnerability and they teach you what you should be doing. So I started looking at the brain in 1991, and we've looked at over 250,000 scans. But early on, I came to realize you're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better, and I can prove it. And so if I look at your brain and then you have a car accident, your brain's going to be worse. If I look at your brain and then you go on a drug bender, your brain is going to be worse. If I look at your brain and then all of a sudden you stop sleeping or you go through a divorce, odds are your brain's going to change in a negative way. But I also did the big NFL study. When the NFL was sort of lying they had a problem with traumatic brain injury in football, 80% of my players got better. I could see the damage, but when they go on a brain healthy program, 80%, their brains looked better anywhere from 2 to 6 months later. That's exciting. 1995, I get a call late one night from my sister-in-law, Sherry, who told me my 9-year-old nephew, Andrew, had attacked a little girl on the baseball field for no particular reason. And I'm like, what? And she said, Danny, he's different. He's mean. He doesn't smile anymore. I went into his room today and found 2 pictures he had drawn. One of them, he was hanging from a tree. The other picture, he was shooting other children. So if you think about it, he's Columbine or Sandy Hook or Parkland, Florida, waiting to happen. And I'm like, I want to see him tomorrow. And they lived 8 hours from me. So they brought him to me. I'm like, buddy, what's going on? And he's like, Uncle Danny, I'm just mad all the time. I'm like, is anybody hurting you? No. Is anybody teasing you? No. Is anybody touching you in places that shouldn't be touching you? No. And 999 child psychiatrists out of 1,000 would put him on medicine and therapy. And because of my experience, I already scanned 1,000 people at that point. I'm like, he's got a left temporal lobe problem. And so I'm like, I held his hand while he held his teddy bear and got scanned. And he was missing the function of his left temporal lobe. I'd never seen it. I've seen it 100 times since then. It turned out he had a cyst the size of a golf ball occupying the space of his left temporal lobe. And I told his pediatrician, I said, you find somebody to take it out because he wasn't in my neighborhood. And he talked to 3 neurologists. All of them said they wouldn't touch the cyst until he had real symptoms. At which point, I lost my mind and I start screaming at the pediatrician. I have a homicidal, suicidal child who attacks people for no reason. What do you mean real symptoms? And he got anxious and he said, I think they mean like seizures or he loses consciousness. I'm like, serious? And in my head, I'm like, neurologists, neurosurgeons. Neurosurgeons will do stuff. So I called UCLA, talked to the head of the pediatric neurosurgery department, Jorge Lazarev, and he said, Dr. Amen, when these cysts are symptomatic, we drain them. He's obviously symptomatic. And after the surgery, I got 2 calls. One from my sister-in-law who said the surgery went really well, and when Andrew woke up, he smiled at her. She said, Danny, he's not smiled for a year. And Then I got a call from Dr. Lazarev, who said, oh my God, Dr. Raymond, that cyst was so aggressive that put so much pressure on Andrew's brain that thinned the bone over his left temporal lobe. So his skull had been thinned. He said if he would have been hit in the head with the basketball, it would have killed him instantly. Either way, would have been dead in 6 months.